Mhm. Pat, how are we looking as far as attendance? Sorry. Didn't mean to scare you.
I was just looking at, I was scrolling up and down the list to see who was here.
I'm here.
And now that's captured on YouTube for everyone to enjoy. Oh, that's funny. I can take a roll and we can, I'm sure we should have plenty to start.
Eyeballed it and saw it. Okay.
Yeah.
Should we, what do you think? Should we launch? Should we go on?
I think I can take roll and then I'll watch and see if people join after we're finished.
Okay, awesome.
And that way we can start on time.
Wonderful. I think I'm showing 11 o'clock.
Yes, me too.
Let's convene the meeting and welcome members to the November meeting of the Transit Management Committee and the Rail Management Committee. Pat will now call the roll.
Okay. Charlene Panella, City of Avondale. Roger Klinginger, City of Buckeye.
Roger Klingler here.
Sorry, I mispronounced your name. Ryan Peters, City of Chandler.
Here.
Autumn Grooms or Crystal Dykes from the City of El Mirage. Dave Trimble, Town of Fountain Hills.
Here.
Mary Goodman, Town of Gilbert. Kevin Lee, City of Glendale.
Here.
Julie Cairns is not attending today. Cameron Doling, Maricopa County. Chris Brady, City of Mesa.
Here.
Eric Strunk, City of Peoria.
Here.
Mario Paniagua, City of Phoenix.
Good morning, Pat. This is Jesus. Mario should be joining shortly. I'll stay on till he does.
Okay. Bruce Gardner, Town of Queen Creek.
Here.
Mark Milanchenko, City of Scottsdale.
Here.
Mike Gent, City of Surprise.
Here.
Stephen Methan, City of Tempe. Shatwan Reed from ADOT. Chair, we're ready to go.
Thank you, Pat. If a committee member would like to ask a question or make a comment during the meeting, please type your comment in the box and it will be read aloud and answered. All meeting attendees, please mute your computer, microphone, or phone. All right, first item is public comment. The public will be provided with an opportunity at this time to address the committees on non-agenda items and all action items, all action agenda items. Up to 3 minutes will be provided per speaker unless the chair allows more at his or her discretion. A total of 15 minutes for all speakers will be provided. Do we have any public comments then, Pat?
Yes, sir. Blue Crowley is here today.
Okay.
He's
Mr.
making
Crowley?
his way to the microphone.
All right. Good morning, members of the board. The item that I'm going to be discussing is the evaluation. One of the things it has in there is bus stops for Avondale. Being one of the ones that wrote the initial Prop 400, part of what we wanted was bus stops to be a part of the plan. And as a member of the Phoenix contingent, I had asked staff what the industry standard was. Well, they said there wasn't any. Then when I got a hold of the Scottsdale plan, it showed that it's every quarter mile. And going that as a premise, wondering why, with the plan that we put forth, that where are all your bus stops? I don't see that as a part of what each of your communities is doing, as a proactive part of what the plan is supposed to be. I'd also like to point out that with your planning and such, one of the first time I dealt with you people was May 26th, 86. And I asked at that time where the lottery funds were going, where their plans were for them, and what they used them for. And they said that I should go ask the lottery. The meeting was for the crossing of the freeway up here by the light rail and making sure that the bridge was strong enough to have the rail. But also, there is a 3-story transit facility right there in the middle of the tunnel. And we've used it how much? What are your future plans for it? Why can't we use something that we got $28 million to build and it was a sham in the first place? Because the only reason you needed it was for the rail to be able to cross the freeway, and they needed to have it extra strong construction. But there's a facility there. It was there before I got involved in what we're doing. When is it going to be completed? Where is the Sweet Acacia station that would be able to take all of the bus passengers that were supposedly going to be using that facility and be able to transfer to the rail? But you are two agencies trying to work together, but I never see anything that's multimodal from you. And I'll see you in 3 minutes. I'm giving you back 5.
All right, Mr. Crawley, thank you. All right. I think that's all we have for public comment, I believe. And did Mr. Smith make it to his remote office? Is he on board right now, Pat? I can't tell.
I am
Yes,
in
he's-
transit.
You're in transit.
I am in my mobile office, which is
Okay.
wonderful.
You want to
So,
give your report mobilely?
I will do that. This is the great thing about WebEx. We can be anywhere and everywhere, and who knows where all of you are. We're not going to ask, right? So thank you very much, Mr. Brady, and to everybody. Welcome to the managers meeting. We appreciate it. A couple of quick things to update you on that I'd like to report. We had the privilege of going out to Fountain Hills, meeting with Grady and Mayor Dickey and Mike Charnow, our board member from Fountain Hills, council member, to initiate our new express route, the Route 515, which will run from Fountain Hills into the McDowell Road Transit Center and provide quick connection to downtown Phoenix and everything in the East Valley. This is a great example of cities and Valley Metro working together. When there were some challenges to the pre-existing express route out of Fountain Hills, both city staff and Valley Metro staff and elected officials got together and came up with what I think is a very innovative and a good solution to continue to provide services to the part of our valley that isn't normally receiving transit services. So we're excited about that. As you can see in the picture, we have one of our new MCI coach buses that we are continuing to receive to replace our existing express route. These are very, very comfortable. This is a premium service, and these are premium buses. But the great thing is the buses actually cost less than the replacements, and they're cheaper in the life cycle to operate than would be a standard bus. So we're really excited about this service and these buses. Next thing is, last week we had the opportunity to get together for the 34th annual Clean Air Campaign. This is run by Valley Metro staff, working with your staff and companies around the valley to ensure that we have commute solutions and alternative transportation, alternative to getting in a car and driving to your office. It's a great event, and we were very, very fortunate to be able to go back in person once again at the Heard Museum along our light rail line. First time we've been able to do that, be on along our light rail line, and we're especially grateful to our chair, Council Member Francisco Heredia from Mesa, who gave a very nice update as to what we've been doing at Valley Metro for a very appreciative crowd. So thank you for all of you and your involvement. Cities and city staff are deeply involved in our efforts to provide commute solutions and alternatives to clean our air. Finally, would like to talk to you about some of the what's going on in downtown Phoenix. We're very excited about the progress of the construction of the South Central Extension and Downtown Hub. As you can tell by this picture, it's a very, very challenging job. Whoops, we're right in the middle of a very intense urban area, and there's a lot of conflicts and disruptions, and we appreciate the city. Don't laugh, Pat. The city and the stakeholders. This picture here, if you're familiar with the bridge that used to go from the east side of Cityscape to the west side, we've had to remove that bridge, and we just put new girders up that provide sufficient clearance. And you can see the track is already laid, and we've started on the station that will be there right in the middle of Cityscape. When this is finished, this is going to be a pretty exciting area. The hub of the downtown hub, and people from all over the valley, as they come on our light rail, will meet at this point in downtown Phoenix. And I think what excites me the most is that you really see how transit and light rail in particular will change the way our citizens interact and the way that we come together as a regional community. So we're very excited about the progress that's being that we're seeing on this project. Just want to give you a reminder that of the upcoming meeting dates. We will not be meeting as the TMC RMC in December because our our board meetings will not take place in December. We'll see you back as the TMC RMC in January, although we do have other meetings that will go on, such as RTAG and other during the month of December. And Mr. Chair, that's my report.
Thank you very much, Mr. Smith. Now we'll move to the consent agenda. The consent agenda is presented for action. If there's any questions or there are any items that need to be pulled for separate discussion from the committee members, we'll entertain that motion now or request now. If not, I'm going to request a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda and for the items to the board of directors for approval.
Mr. Chair, this is Roger. I move approval of the consent agenda.
Okay, we have a motion to approve the consent agenda. Do we have a second?
This is Dave Trimble. I'll second.
Thank you, Dave. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
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 Are there any opposed to this item, consent item? Okay, thank you very much. The consent agenda is approved. Now move to item number 4, insurance coverage renewal, commercial property and liability, and workers' compensation and employers' liability. We're going to ask Mr. Smith, if he's still with us, if he'll introduce this item. Or
With you, I'm sorry, I'm looking for buttons. As you all know, the insurance market is very, very, very iffy right now, and we've had some real challenges. We've been working closely with your staff on these insurance programs, but I'm going to turn over to Mike Manow, who heads our risk department, and Mike will give a presentation as to where we are with our insurance.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Mr. Brady, committee members, Mr. Smith's right. This has been and I suspect your cities are experiencing similar circumstances as well, but it's really been an unprecedented sort of correction year. At least that's how it's been described to us by our broker. We've spent, every year we spend an extensive amount of time with a broker who's contracted with Valley Metro by way of a competitive being successful through a competitive procurement process in using its extensive outreach to go through the market and find the best available options for each line of coverage. And then, of course, to sit down with risk professionals from the cities and staff and explain and weigh in on those, or at least provide an opportunity to weigh in on all those options, and then find a way to present to the TMC and RMC boards today, and of course, eventually to the boards for approval, the insurance program. This year was a little bit different because there is some sticker shock, which was, of course, anticipated, provided the environment. But we spent a little bit of extra time with respect to one line of coverage that is really sort of dominating the increase that we're seeing this year, and that's the inland marine coverage. That line of coverage is responsible for covering damages, damage and replacement to the light rail vehicle fleet and the streetcar fleet as well. The broker, we spent some extra time with the cities who are eventually responsible for covering these costs, answered questions. The broker presented options, and it is the unanimous decision of everyone who has been involved. That's Valley Metro, that's the broker, as well as risk professionals and other city staff members, that the program that is currently presented is the best, simply the best available in the market at this time. And happy to entertain any questions.
Mr. Smith, anything else? Or Mike, that's it?
That's it. Thank you.
I think we should open up for discussion. I think some of the comments I've heard regarding this item and I guess it would have come into play. So talk to us a little bit about, you're saying the inland marine, the coverage for the damage to the vehicles. I've heard there's been some discussion about that we lack coverage from third-party vendors also for that may be operating our vehicles or our equipment. I guess the question is, why weren't those included in those contracts? And is it too late to get some additional coverage from those operators that work for Valley Metro, but through a third-party contract?
Mr. Brady, thank you. Committee members, thank you for the question. I think I'll provide some foundation that might help answer that. So, with respect to the bus side, we transfer the risk, which is the insurance coverage, and also the defense and indemnity obligations to the service provider. And that's by design, and it's very successful so that there is no finger pointing in the event of some sort of incident where there is damage and an eventual lawsuit. On the light rail side, Valley Metro uses its size and capability in the market to actually purchase the insurance. And so we purchase the insurance, and we also, are aligned with ACI, who is the contractor involved with providing the light rail service. We work collaboratively together with them to put together the defense when claims arise. I know that with respect to the folks who are responsible for contract management, they do an excellent job of finding ways to collaboratively work together and to fine tune things that need to be, so that they can provide safe and secure and efficient services at all times. You're going to pay for the insurance at some point, and so Valley Metro has always purchased the insurance because it is at the end of the day a little bit less less costly. But then also we are aligned in the event there are, in terms of jointly defending against any claims that may arise.
Yes, but how does that play with if the third party has some responsibility through their staff that aren't following procedures or haven't been vetted on the hiring process? So they're kind of immune from that liability because they're not, we're having to pick up that cost. So I'm just wondering if that's best practices, because most of the contracts with at least our community, that's a requirement, right, by our risk managers, is those contracts come with some type of indemnity from those contractors.
Yes, those contracts are extensive and comprehensive, and there are warranties in those contracts in terms of the type of the scope of service and the manner in which the service can be performed. And there are other triggers in those contracts that occur in the event of the certain activities that would require legal defense and eventual costs and indemnification. So those contracts are have robust defense and indemnity arrangements.
Okay. I know it's been going up. You're correct. Obviously, this has been a segment of our budget that's been growing significantly and seems like out of control, and even fewer insurers that are even available to even procure this from. But is there anything in the experiences of loss that are concerning to us that we might see some kind of trends in frequency or severity that we think we could manage differently in the future that might mitigate against other future increases like this? Has any assessment like that been done?
On an annual basis, Valley Metro and the light rail service provider are involved in lawsuits, and this is certainly all available to the public. We are involved in a handful of lawsuits on an annual basis, and when those suits are resolved, certainly the internal teams will meet and go through any potential trends that need to be reviewed and raised through the safety and security teams. But in terms of specific trends, Mr. Brady, there are no specific trends that we're seeing. If we do see something like that, they're certainly raised immediately and brought to so that they can be resolved.
Thank you. Are there any questions on this item? All right, so do we have a motion and a second for approval to forward this item to the Board of Directors for authorization to purchase renewal coverage for Valley Metro's insurance needs?
Chris, this is Kevin Link. I move approval.
I'll move.
Okay, I have a motion. Do I have a second?
This is
From Peoria.
Okay, so I hear a Peoria second. All right, so we have a motion and a second. Yeah, sorry about, it's kind of confusing, but don't be shy. Jump in there when you can. So we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
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 Does anybody oppose the approval of item 4? Very good, thank you. All right, well, we're moving to item number 5. This is fiscal year 2020 transit performance report. Mr. Smith, will you introduce this item, please?
I will. Thank you, Mr. Brady. And I'd like to turn it over to Jim Hilliard. And I don't know, Jim, I don't know who's going to be with you, present this, but I'll turn it over to you for presentation.
Thanks, Scott. Marty Zeke is here with us today to take the lead on this. Marty.
Thank you, Jim. Chair Brady and members of the committees, I am here to present to you the transit performance report for fiscal year 2020. So that is July of 2019 through June of 2020. Before I get into the actual data, I would like to send a huge thank you to all of your staff that helped us compile this report. As you'll see throughout this presentation, we did a much more comprehensive look into our performance in fiscal year 20, mainly due to the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic coming to the Valley in March of 2020. And of course, those impacts remaining with us to this day. So in past years, TPR was really just a year-on-year comparison. In this report, we did that same year-on-year comparison that we've done in past years, as well as added a more detailed look into what happened within fiscal year 20 from the period before COVID was with us and then the period that COVID was with us. Next slide, please. So just to give some system highlights, similar to in past years, we see because of COVID, we have a little over an 18% decrease in total boardings when compared to the year prior. Similar to past years, our mode share amongst our different service modes remained the same. About 3/4 of all system boardings were on bus. Our highest boardings per mile of all of our different services was our rail system at just above 3.75. Our ADA on-time performance remained high at almost 92%. And our van pool fare stayed within that average that we've been seeing in past years at about $3.84. In terms of historical ridership, looking at the past 15 years, we do see that significant dip in FY20, but if we were to look at just the pre-COVID numbers, we see that ridership remained pretty steady with fiscal year 19, with that major dip occurring mainly due to the pandemic. In terms of our operating cost per vehicle mile, we're seeing a similar increase to what we saw from fiscal year 18 to 19 at about 50 cents. Now, this is where this report will get interesting. There are a few slides throughout the report where we focus specifically on impacts from COVID-19. All of those slides will have that top section showing the little COVID graphic and that piece. So the way to think of these is that these are all within fiscal year 20, not comparing year on year, but comparing the pre-COVID era, July 2019 through February 2020, to what we saw starting in March 2020 through the end of the fiscal year in June. So the takeaway from this, looking at our overall ridership, is that we saw significant drops, especially on weekdays, but that on the weekends, we actually saw quite a bit of retention. What this takeaway shows is that we still maintained quite a few riders throughout the pandemic, especially on those weekends and in those off-peak hours, showing that we really did remain a vital service to Valley residents for essential trips. In terms of how the agency responded to COVID-19, right away in March, when the threat became real, rear door boarding on buses was implemented, as well as enhanced cleaning and fogging of all fleet, and of course, strong messaging to all of our riders about this. In April, as we saw ridership decline, we reduced service to fit that demand, while ensuring that we remain safe for both our staff and our traveling public. So service was reduced on express and rapid trips, light rail, circulators, and on little pieces of local routes, which were the limited service sections. However, our local routes stayed pretty much the same in terms of their frequencies to serve the customers, at least at this point. And then in June 2020, to kind of gain a sense of how riders were being impacted by the changes that were put into place, Valley Metro did conduct a rider survey on the COVID protocols. So moving on to the mode by mode comparison, looking at our bus system historically, we saw a slight decline in ridership from fiscal year 18 to 19, and then a somewhat significant dip in fiscal year 20, again due to the pandemic. If we were to not have had the pandemic, our ridership would have remained pretty steady. Looking at it by the day of the week, our largest decline in bus ridership came on the weekdays, where we saw just over a 20% decrease year on year. In terms of Saturday boardings, in fiscal year 19, new service was added on Saturdays. And prior to the COVID pandemic, we actually saw a continued increase in ridership. So that's why, even though we have 4 months of COVID ridership data in here, we only saw about a 2% decrease year on year in Saturday boardings. And then in terms of Sunday boardings, similar to the weekdays when COVID hit, there was an impact. This was about 16% year on year. When we look at the bus system in terms of the COVID pandemic, so again, comparing within that fiscal year, the pre-COVID period to the COVID period, we see that the declines in ridership varied significantly based on the type of route. Our local bus system saw less than a 50% decline, and this really shows how our services strongly provide great connections to essential workers and that people were absolutely continuing to use the services they needed. Our circulator systems, we saw about a 68% decline, and the largest decline in terms of our bus modes was on the express and rapid routes, about an 80% decline, mainly due to the fact that a lot of companies and government agencies in that downtown Phoenix and state capital area had switched to a work from home model, just creating less ridership potential for those routes. And the rural route, similar to the local bus, saw about a 50% decline. Moving on to the rail system, year on year, we do see a decline from about 15 million riders to about 12.83 million over the course of the year. Similar to bus, the vast majority of this drop occurred during the COVID period. Looking at our light rail ridership by day type, this trend follows very closely to what we saw with our local buses, about a 50% drop in ridership on the weekdays and then lesser amounts on the weekends. Similar to the bus, we see that our rail system was heavily used by workers getting to essential jobs and services, and that we saw that retention of ridership, especially in those non-peak and weekend periods. In terms of our paratransit system, we see that our on-time performance is at about 92%, and our operating cost per boarding went up, but it was a smaller decrease than it was from fiscal year 18 to 19. And then in terms of our paratransit system and the reaction to the pandemic, we continue to provide service throughout the pandemic period. Of course, as you can see, this is our daily ridership on the system. It did go down by a little less than half, but we still had the service there, and customers, if they so chose, were still able to take those essential trips to work, to the doctor, and whatever other needs our ADA community had. And to close us off, just a couple slides on how we compared to our peer agencies, comparing fiscal year 19 to fiscal year 20, where that COVID period started. And a quick note on this, as we had a much larger data collection to be able to provide this information to the group, all of our peers had a similar challenge. And so you will see this is not our entire peer list. These are the peers in which we were able to get data from. So looking at the ridership change, we did see a slightly larger decline in our bus ridership than our peers. However, our rail ridership maintained pretty consistent during COVID with our peers. And then finally, looking at fare box recovery as compared to a couple of our peer agencies that were able to report that data, we did see larger fare box recovery drops than those two peers on our bus side. And again, similar to what happened with ridership, on our rail side, it was pretty similar. With this, that concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions from the committees.
Very good. Thank you for putting that information together. It's very, very interesting, very helpful. Any questions regarding the report? Okay, again, thank you very much, staff, for putting that together. That's a lot of work and pulling all those numbers. It's interesting to kind of step back and see what the impacts were, and hopefully it'll be even more interesting to see what the recovery looks like too. So thank you very much. All right, we'll move on to item 5, travel expenditures and solicitations. This item is presented for information only. Are there any questions? No action is required on this item, but is there any questions? If not, we'll move to item 6, quarterly reports. Are there any questions on this item? Very good.
Mr. Brady?
Oh, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, if I could just, I like to point out when our staff is doing a great job, and I'm looking at slide 14, I believe. I just like, there's one thing about our maintenance. You know, we contract out maintenance for our bus service and for other services, but for rail, we manage those services in-house. Rob Rosenberg, Ray Abraham, their teams do a great job. And just looking at the mechanical failures, one of the benchmarks we use is how often we have mechanical failures. As you can imagine, maintaining trains is a very complex undertaking. And if you look at that, in last quarter, we were a mechanical failure was every 21,225 miles. That only makes sense if you compare it to your peers, and our peers are across the country, and you can see that the national average is about 17,005. So in this one area, our team is performing substantially better than the national average and other teams from other agencies. I just want to point that out to you and to them, because I think they are sort of the unsung heroes. People in maintenance, especially with complex systems, sort of operate in the shadows until something really bad happens. And I just wanted to give them a shout out for the good work they continue to do to put service on the streets in a consistent and high quality manner. So just wanted to make that point. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Smith. Thank you, Mr. Smith, and thank you, staff, for keeping the trains moving. That's awesome. Thank you. Okay, item number 7 is again travel expenditures solicitations presented for information. Are there any future agenda items that a committee member would like to place on the agenda? If not, as was mentioned earlier, the next meeting of the TMC RMC is scheduled for Wednesday, January 5th, 2022 2? Is that right? At 11 a.m.
Sounds weird to say that, but
I
that's true.
know, because especially, yeah. Yes, my notes were, I had a hesitate there for a second. Okay. All right, that concludes the joint meeting. We'll now move to the Transit Management Committee meeting for November 3rd. Convene that meeting now. The public has an opportunity to address the committee at this time on non-agenda items and all action items. 3 minutes will be provided per speaker. Pat, do we have any speakers?
Yes, Mr. Crowley is at the podium.
Go ahead, Mr. Crowley.
Thank you. I'd like to point out in the minutes of your last meeting and this meeting, there are places that I brought up from documents that said these are things that you were planning and going to be doing. Well, I note that with the government's Build Back Better plan, they were wanting to see shovel-ready projects, and I know that the rail got their fingers in it as much as they could, but did the bus, the transit, did any of your communities? Because what are you doing in the planning section of what we put together on Prop 400 and said, these are the parts and situations that you need to deal with? And part of that is the grid and the continuing expansion. Well, over the last how many years, instead of expanding, we do service changes that weren't expanding the system, but just changing it. I don't find that to be what it needs to be. As to your agenda item, the advertising, I want every damn dime we can get from that kind of thing. But the other part of it is that when you have had meetings, public outreach, etc., I've asked, why don't you have it in those advertisements in the bus? The answer, well, that's not our advertising. Well, when you're doing public outreach to your ridership, wouldn't it make sense to any of you that wouldn't you put that meeting announcements on the bus, especially in that big one right behind the driver, saying, we're doing outreach, we need you to participate. Now, I've been coming up here for, like I said, 35 years. I've been a part of what's wrote the thing, and I continually see that the system is more interested in itself than in the public and what needs to be done. The parts of this are the bus book, which you're not going to be printing anymore. Well, what happens when the supplement comes out with the call center? Why don't you have it operating when the buses are operating? When you had a holiday recently and I needed to find out where the bus was and didn't have a book, it was closed. You also close it at 8 o'clock at night. Well, is that when the buses stop? Is that when the rail stops? What I need you to do is see this as a plan to be 24 hours, 7 days a week, so that the public can use it all that time. And wouldn't it be nice if you had customer service so that people could find out where the buses are or the rail is going to be and the timeliness of it, and have it open so that they can get that information? Thank you.
All right, assuming there's no other items, no other speakers, we'll now move to the consent agenda. So the consent agenda is presented for action. Is there there's only one item on consent, I believe.
There are two.
Two?
There's the minutes and the LED lighting
Oh, sorry,
upgrade
yeah,
at the
right.
Mesa Bus Operations and
I see
Maintenance
that.
Facility.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you very much. 2A and 2B. Does anyone want to pull either one of these items for further discussion? If not, I'll entertain a motion and a second for approval of the consent agenda.
Mr. Chair, this is Mario. I move approval of the consent agenda.
We have a motion. We have a second. I'll leave Mario hanging.
This is Mike from Surprise, second.
Okay, I heard surprise. All right, so we have a Phoenix motion and a surprise second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Does anyone oppose the approval of the consent agenda? All right, very good. All right. Exciting. Let's move to item number 3. Valley Metro Bus Advertising Program. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Brady. Several months ago, some board members requested that the Valley Metro staff give an update as to the status of advertising on the exteriors of our buses. Just a little bit of background to remind you. Based on policies that have been longstanding with Valley Metro, we have not allowed any advertising on either the exterior or interior of our buses. There is advertising, as you see, on City of Phoenix buses, and there is also advertising on our light rail vehicles, mostly wraps and other advertising. So the board asked us to look into that. We did some preliminary investigations, reported to the board, and there was enough interest in the board to move forward to those studies and to come back to them with a program that would allow for advertising on the exterior of buses. Present them to you, then go back to the board and present the program for the possible adoption and implementation of an exterior advertising program. Our Hillary Foos, our Director of Communications and Special Projects, and I'm going to turn it over to Hillary now to explain what we've come up with and what the proposal is. Hillary.
Thank you, Mr. Smith, Chair, members of the committee. Thanks so much for your time today. As Scott said, there's significant board interest in this particular item. We accelerated this conversation. We plan to come back to the board in January with their priority. We're here in front of you today to have this important conversation. Just to orient you a little bit, I have a very quick presentation to give you an overview of the program that's being recommended, give you a quick overview of the contract mechanism and the revenue potential here. Also share with you the actions that are being sought today from you and eventually, hopefully, the board. And certainly some of the discussions that continue to be underway as it relates to this program with your city staff. So next slide, please. So just a very quick program overview, as Scott said, based on the feedback that we got from the board earlier this year and as part of our continued experience and research as it relates to transit advertising, we are recommending a program that is for the exterior of buses, focused on local fixed route services, buses that operate on local services, as well as circulator buses as determined by those cities. And so really those are conversations that are ongoing with the cities right now about whether or not those communities want to participate, who have circulators want to participate in this advertising program. Again, based on the board's feedback and our continued research, the ad displays themselves, the actual graphics, would prioritize Valley Metro logo and branding. Again, that balance that we wanted to achieve based on our past conversations, and also from a public safety standpoint, the priority to maintain where we could that window visibility. The content of the ad graphics, the actual content, would follow the regional advertising standards that's already part of advertising policies on the Valley Metro Rail and City of Phoenix public transit sides of the business. So we have established advertising standards. Our goal here with this program is to maintain consistency with the programs that already exist in the region. In terms of contract and revenue, back when we did the initial scope for our advertising sales services on the Valley Metro Rail side, we included the possibility of future bus advertising as a potential scope addition. And so fortuitously, we are, I guess, picking that up with the board's interest here and are able to use the Outfront Media contract to begin advertising sales opportunities with our bus program. So one of the actions here that I'll review with you momentarily is to utilize the existing advertising sales services agreement with Outfront. Outfront has committed to maintaining a 65% revenue share, which is the existing rate that Valley Metro Rail has, and is also very commensurate with our peers in the industry, including City of Phoenix and our national transit agency peers, meaning that we will get 65% of the net revenue generated by advertising to Valley Metro RPTA. After about a 12-month or so ramp-up period, we estimate the agency could generate between $600,000 to $700,000 annually with the program. The area that we're still coordinating on is that, and this was part of the conversation that we had with you earlier this year, is that there will be additional oversight and coordination on the part of our contractor, First Transit, to have bus advertising really take shape at our operating facilities that will require additional labor hours and could require additional positions. And so we are coordinating with our contractor on those additional needs. And so those costs are not included in this revenue potential. Again, to implement the program, we really are looking for 2 actions from you today and eventually from the board. We would like your concurrence to adopt an actual advertising policy for Valley Metro RPTA. Again, as Scott mentioned, Valley Metro RPTA has historically had a no advertising policy. So really this would be creating an advertising policy for the Valley Metro RPTA organization. The policy does 2 things, really. It outlines the available opportunities as part of the advertising program. And the most important piece is it really sets the advertising standards for how we will approve content. And again, those standards are consistent with what we have on Valley Metro Rail and also consistent with the City of Phoenix, and that consistency being paramount. The second action in front of you today is to utilize the advertising sales services agreement with Outfront Media through June of 2023. We are currently in a 3-year option period with Outfront Media, taking us through June of 2023. So in 2022, we can have conversations with your city staff about how the program is working and potential future procurement options, whether we re-procure or continue with Outfront Media. And just for your information, obviously this is a big undertaking, and so there's certainly conversations underway with your teams. We had a meeting with many of your city staff on Monday to give them an update on this program. And there was a lot of discussion even at the board meeting earlier this year about whether or not certain city sign ordinances, policies within those cities would allow our advertising program to move forward. We confirmed with research earlier this year and also at the meeting earlier this week that as a moving asset, obviously our buses are not a fixed post. We can move forward with this program and plan to. And we are also working with our communities to understand whether or not they want their funded circulators to be part of the advertising scope. Right now, Mesa Buzz routes are currently included, and we're working with our other cities to understand, again, if there's interest in including any further circulators as part of the program. And certainly the other conversation that we started on Monday that will continue to be a point of conversation is how do we allocate the revenue from this revenue opportunity. And we really talked through a couple different models. And we're really looking for the city's feedback on this. Valley Metro is pretty indifferent in terms of how the revenue is allocated. We offered a couple of options. There's an annual revenue mile allocation, which is similar to other credits that we do at Valley Metro. Basically, we would allocate the revenue by revenue mile for those modes that are participating within the program. And regional services allocation, as you may very well know, there is a regional pot of funds that support regional services such as customer service and Valley Metro marketing. And the program revenue could fund those needs, freeing up additional PTF for actual PTF services, funded bus service. So we're reviewing those options with the cities as we speak. So that concludes my presentation. I'm certainly happy to answer any questions that you may have. And again, looking for your support in a couple action items today.
So that Mr. Smith, Matt? Are there any questions on this item from members of the board?
Mr. Brady, this is Eric Iverson with City of Tempe. I'm actually serving as Stephen Methvin's proxy for today. I did have a couple comments and questions from Tempe, if I could go.
Please.
All right. Hey, thanks for the information, Mr. Smith and Hillary, for this program. Tempe is, we're supportive of advancing this. I think you had two asks. We are in support of advancing this program. As you know, our council has indicated support for this as well as a way to increase revenues, not just regionally, but locally too, in helping support the costs that we all have. I had a couple questions. Maybe they're kind of more comments and for us to clarify as we go through this process. Certainly appreciate the concern about protecting the brand and the customer experience and, windows. And we've heard those same concerns in our community. I'm just curious as we go forward, if there's a way to, get a range of numbers. If we're talking about 500 to 700,000 in annual revenues now with a more kind of restrictive advertising policy, what does that look like if we broaden it to full wraps and, stuff that does hinder the look of the brand? I'm just kind of curious if we can get those numbers as we go forward, so we really understand what the ultimate or the kind of highest potential of revenue could be for advertising. So that's one. And then I know this came up Monday, but we have a concern about the personnel costs or the kind of the operating costs of a program like this. If that gets so high that and the revenues aren't that high from the advertising, where's the break point, when making it worth our while to do this to the system and to bring in enough money that it makes it worth the while of the other costs that we may incur. So I think that's, again, maybe it doesn't stop us from moving forward now, but that's a concern we just want to put out there. And then finally, we really in Tempe support the allocation formula being really based on the annual revenue miles for the cities, and just wanted to put that out there. I know you're asking for feedback on that. With that, I'll stop talking and those are our comments. Thank you.
Hillary, you want to take a shot at that, or I can answer a couple of those questions?
Go ahead, Mr. Smith.
Oh, okay. I'll just answer the revenue because we can actually look at a broad-based example right now. To start with, the revenues we're looking at this, we would just be straightforward, are not earth-shattering. It's just that you're looking at, let's say, 600, 700,000, and that comes from out front. And that's, they're wanting to get the work. So I don't think that those are overly conservative. And we also have a pretty good gauge because we can look and see what the city of Phoenix generates. With a fleet that's basically twice the size of ours and operating primarily in the urban core with more frequency where they can demand higher rates, according to Outfront. They're running, I think last year, about $2 million in their gross revenue. So if you look at that, our 600,000 to 700,000 probably isn't far off from what the potential really is. We're not going to be pulling $2 and $3 million out of this program, and those are revenue that, as we said, are net to Outfront, but before any of the additional costs that we incur. And frankly, we don't know what those costs are. We've worked closely with the city of Phoenix to find out, to get a better understanding as to the differences of managing a rail program, which we're very familiar with, and a bus program, which creates some different challenges. We know where the rail cars are always. The buses are moving, and it requires a little bit more babysitting. There's more of them, and there's no doubt that this is that this will require a large amount of management oversight from our standpoint. What the dollar is, we won't know until we actually get in there. We're actually working also with our provider, First Transit, to get a better idea of what they would require on their end, since they have to manage the actual. They're working on some numbers, but they won't know until we really come back and find out what the program will be and exactly what they'll need to commit to this. So I would say that if you're looking at 600,000 to 700,000, that's the beginning point. You can sort of do your math from that going down. Is it going to be 50, 100, 200,000? I would say any one of those numbers would not be a shocker as to what our actual cost is, which would reduce the net revenue down. You're in that area where, I don't know, this is a policy decision for this group and for the board to make as to whether $400,000 to $600,000 in additional revenue into the pot, which by the time it gets split up is filtered out pretty well, is worth the efforts. And that's we're indifferent. That's purely a policy decision. We'll do what the management group and what the board decides. But I think we should all go in with eyes wide open that this is not a winning the lottery. Someone the other day put it, it's more like getting a nice scratcher, but it's not like winning the lottery. There will be a lot of work for not an overwhelming amount of revenue. I don't want to say that revenue of $400,000 or $500,000 is insignificant, but on the other hand, a local route is a minimum of $1.5 million, $2 million a year to operate. So we wouldn't be adding any local or any service based on advertising revenue. It would just help us to offset and go into the pot to offset what we're already incurring. Hillary, you want to take the Phoenix program? I would say is more aggressive than ours because they do have a certain amount of larger wraps and more offerings. There's some reasons why we have
Scott, you're cutting.
I'm cutting out.
Hey, Scott. Oh, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You were cutting in and out. Do you want me to describe the graphics we're looking to?
Yeah. Why don't you tell us just the general feel for why we chose the more limited program?
Okay, so based on the discussion from the board meeting, we heard a lot of feedback about trying to create some balance between, keeping our system looking good and professional and of high quality without maybe over cluttering the system. And so what we have built this proposal on and these numbers on, and what Outfront has built their proposal on, are ad graphics that stay between the wheels. And so there's a variety of sizes, standard advertising types and sizes that the industry uses on both sides of the vehicle. There are some ad types that do cover some of the windows, but again, it stays between the wheels. So we still get that branding on the front and the back end, and it stays contained to the center of the vehicle. And so those are the types of ad types that we are, based on the board's feedback and our research within the industry, that we are proposing to move forward with.
All right.
Thanks, Hillary.
Any other questions?
Yes, Chris, it's Eric from Peoria. Just a real quick question. It's on the draft advertising policy itself. So I fully appreciate the concept and really good presentation. Out of curiosity, on the second page, it says all advertising is subject to approval by Valley Metro RPCA and or its designated representatives. Do you see you've done a good job of listing out specific ads that you'll guard against. Do you see it's growing potentially? I'm kind of curious about that part of it, if you do this.
Yeah, thank you for the question on the advertising standards. We have used that set of advertising standards for, gosh, we've had the program on Valley Metro Rail since 2009. It's probably been amended maybe one time. And we work very closely with the city of Phoenix to make sure that our advertising standards stay consistent. That's obviously helpful for many reasons. So as they approve ads, we approve the same ad content. And so I don't foresee it changing all that much. It hasn't historically. And it really helps us. It's a pretty strong set of standards, particularly the item about the subject matter must contain a commercial transaction that has been tried and tested many times. And we thank the city of Phoenix for some of that history. And that really allows us to keep the content commercial and out of some of the sticky situations related to like public service announcements or political ads or things that get a little more sensitive. So I don't imagine it changing all that much. It's been very effective for us, those set of standards.
Thanks for answering that, Hillary. The reason why I asked that is the devil's always in the details on this sometimes.
Sure.
The more you can keep it out of our hands, the better off it is. So for sharing that.
Yeah. Sure.
All right, any other questions?
Mr. Chair, this is Mario.
Go ahead, Mario.
Yeah, just more of just a comment, just to say that Phoenix is supportive of moving forward with this. We've done this for several decades on our buses, and we definitely have seen the benefits. It's not a huge benefit relative to the overall program, but you know, every little bit can contribute and be a part of the mix. Scott's right about our numbers. It was just under $2 million net that we made here in Phoenix on our bus advertising, and there is a lot of coordination that needs to be involved on the buses and getting the ads on there. A lot of contract monitoring that has to happen, making sure that there's not damage to the buses, and making sure that we hold the contractor responsible if there is any damage for those kinds of repairs. But even with all of that, we still think it's a positive thing to move forward. So we're supportive.
Thank you.
Thank you. I would weigh in to say, I'm not, this doesn't get me as excited as I was originally, because I just, like you all are saying, I don't think we're doing this because it's going to balance everybody's budget, or if you have budget struggles, this is going to materially make a difference. But I get it, every little bit helps, but when you then spread it across the regional, whatever, mileage or whatever, it's going to diminish pretty quickly. I would say that for some of us who have the bus routes in our downtowns and areas where we don't have, and we don't allow a lot of signage, commercial signage, even when light rail comes through with its advertising on it, it's a stark contrast to the built environment that it's going through. And so now introducing buses throughout the community where we're very restrictive on that signage, I think we have to be careful. I wouldn't want to overdo it. And then probably more, just as important, I don't want to lose the branding of the buses, and that, you know, that still carries the kind of identifier of what it is, and that it's, you know, how it's associated with the regional transportation system, as opposed to just being this overlay of advertising. So I think it's worth moving forward, but I think we have to caution and manage expectations and not go too far overboard, because I do think it does introduce commercial advertising and a visual that doesn't exist in some of our communities. And so I think I'm okay. I think we move it forward, but I just say we have to do so cautiously and kind of carefully, so it doesn't create its own controversy as we move along.
Hey, Mr. Brady, good.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you. And if all we would ask is that, you know, there's been a lot of different input, a lot of different opinions and input, and I appreciate that. Please take some time to sit down with your board member and have this discussion in your own city. So it will certainly enhance the decision and the conversation at the board level. So I would just ask that you, if you have concerns or observations or positives, make sure that that your board member is fully briefed on this, so we can Because we've heard a lot of different things from different levels throughout the city, and it's sort of somewhat mixed. Everyone's positive toward it, but there are some concerns and other things, and I'd love to have the best conversation we possibly can at the board level.
Okay, thank you. All right, so Pat, it looks like item 3, the advertising program are they two separate, will they be two separate motions? Okay.
Yes, yes, please.
Okay, so the first motion is regarding forwarding to the Board of Directors approval to approve the adoption of the Valley Metro RPTA advertising policy. So do we have a motion and a second for that item? Don't be shy.
This is Mario. I move approval.
Mario has made a motion for approval. Do we have a second?
This is Eric. I'll second.
We have a second from Eric. So we have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Anybody in opposition? Very good. All right, so we're going to go to the second part of item 3. This is to forward to the Board of Directors approval of the contract utilization and authority for advertising cell service with Outfront Media LLC through June 2023. Do I have a motion?
This is Mario again. I move approval.
Mario, do we have a second?
I'll second. Eric. Sorry.
Eric, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Anyone oppose? Thank you. All right, we'll move to item 4. Are there any agenda items for future meetings or any information that the board members would like to bring forward in the future? All right, very good. If not, we'll move to item 5. The next meeting is Wednesday, January 5th, 2022 at 11 a.m. All right, thank you very much. Hold on, I got to find my notes for the next meeting. All right, now we're ready to convene. That was the conclusion of the Transit Management Committee meeting. We're now ready to proceed with the Rail Management Committee for November 3rd, 2021. First item is public comment. Pat, do we have any do we have anyone who would like to speak?
Yes, Mr. Crowley is at the podium.
Mr. Crowley, please proceed.
All right, the item that I'll be discussing is the 3, the capital extension. I was unable to attend the public hearings or the online. I'm incapable of doing the online, but that's because didn't know about them. And I do come here all the time, so I wish that somebody would have tapped me on the shoulder or said, here, this is what's coming up and going. But now going to the actual of what you put together there, I'm looking at it, and there's 2 parts that I have a problem with. Well, the first is the currently adopted high-capacity transit, and then it's got stuff going in 30 and 40. Well, the one going to Paradise Valley, I believe that was totally dropped by the city of Phoenix, because when we started putting everything together, that was the line that was going to be done, and it's gone. But you have it in here. And then also the Glendale extension, I believe they said, hey, we don't want anything on Glendale Avenue, so you're going to get them to change their mind by 40. But then when I look at the routes, I wonder, 1, where the stops are. 2, are you going to be doing multimodal so that on 7th, 15th, and 19th Avenue, the exchange between the bus and the rail is maximized? But then I'm looking at all the different the choices you have, and I note that the one that you say the public's picked is the one that would necessitate the most stops. Because with ingress and regress, how are you going to be accomplishing that? Are you putting one on the Washington and one on Jefferson? Also, y'all know that there are rail on Washington and Jefferson that's been there since, I believe, what, the 20s or 30s? but we'll be putting in new rail. And when you do put that new rail in, where can stops occur along it? Can you build it so that wherever along that line you can put a stop, because it is a major area of in traffic? But like I said, when I'm looking at it, the one that shows me the most stops and the price on them, well, it doesn't have a price on them, would be the one you're going with. So I say, well, why not double track on Washington? That way the ingress and regress is dealt with. And where are these stops going to be? Could somebody get that document to me? And if the board would please instruct staff to do that, I'd appreciate it. Y'all have a pleasant.
Thank you, Mr. Crawley. Assuming that's the last of the speakers, we'll now move to the consent agenda, which has the minutes, the facility maintenance contract change order 2B and 2C steel rail testing services contract award. That is the consent agenda. Do I have a motion for approval?
Move approval. This is Mario.
Thank you, Mario.
I'll
Do I have a
second.
second?
Tempe, second.
Thank you, Tempe. Thank you, Eric. The other Eric. All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Very good. Item number 3, capital extension amended locally preferred alternative and funding agreement. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Brady. I think most of you are aware of our longstanding regional plans to extend light rail westward from downtown Phoenix. The first step in that extension would be what we used to be called the first phase of the Cap I-10 extension. We've now separated those two projects to the capital extension, or CapEx, and the I-10 West extension, which would take a light rail eventually out to the Desert Sky Mall on 79th Avenue in Phoenix. The first part of this formal process is the designation of a locally preferred alternative, or LPA. This is a process that we go through, and when I say the first step, this is the first step in the defined FTA federal process if you want any grant money. This is somewhat unusual because we actually went through this process with CapEx back in 2012, and there was a previously approved LPA, must be approved by both the Phoenix City Council and the Valley Metro Rail Board. Once we started operating light rail in 2008, and as we've looked at the system as a whole, there was a desire to revisit that locally preferred alternative that had been approved in 2012. So for the past literally almost 3 years, we have been working with the city of Phoenix to look at other alternatives for taking this extension down to the state capitol. What we are presenting today is that the result of that process. It has already been approved by the Phoenix City Council, and I will turn it over to our Director of Capital Development, Henry Ikwadukwa, who will either go through himself or introduce the staff who will present the details of this. Henry?
Thank you, Mr. Smith, Chair and members of the committee. I will call on Joshua Matthews, the manager of the project, to make the presentation. Joshua, are you ready?
Thank you, Henry. Thank you, Scott. Good morning, Chair and members of the Rail, or good afternoon, should I say, Chair and members of the Rail Management Committee. I just wanted to note one thing before I got started. Mr. Smith, you mentioned that City Council has approved this. City Council is actually going to take an action on that this afternoon. Just wanted to make that clear for everyone.
A little bit ahead of myself. I thought they had done it this morning, so go ahead.
I know how excited we are, so no worries. I can go to the next slide, please. So as Mr. Smith mentioned, we're talking today about the capital extension, and to get our bearings on our high capacity transit map, we are looking at the extension west from downtown Phoenix out to the state capitol complex. Next slide. Scott also mentioned the 2012 locally preferred alternative, and this was the LPA that City Council passed in 2012, showing a continuation of the single track couplet design that we have in downtown Phoenix right now on Washington and Jefferson, west to approximately 7th Avenue, and then coming down to Jefferson as a more typical dual track alignment out to 18th Avenue. You'll note here the dashed lines, the dashed blue and orange lines. Those were the possible ways of continuing on to what we call the I-10 West extension now. That could either be up 18th Avenue or up 19th Avenue. Next slide. In April of 2019, Phoenix City Council gave Valley Metro and Phoenix staff a directive to revisit this 2012 LPA, as well as re-engage the community in a robust public process to gather their feedback and look into the possibility of updating the LPA. So in response, the team performed technical analysis looking at various options that we'll go through today. We completed that public outreach, and we coordinated with the state agencies that this project will be serving in the future. Next slide, and then next slide again. So again, revisiting our 2012 approved route, this was kind of our baseline, and then we had about 4 or 5 other options that we looked at from a technical perspective. One thing I wanted to note on this 2012 map, you'll see that South Central extension is not included on here. Since 2012, there was a number of actions taken by Phoenix City Council, as well as Valley Metro Board of Directors, to move South Central up in the planning and development process. Go to the next slide. And so each one of these new options that I will walk through quickly here include this updated South Central downtown hub. The dashed gold line that you see here is obviously everything that is under construction today. So our first option, we looked at Washington Street double track. This option had a number of positives. There was good ridership and some operational efficiencies. But the biggest challenge that we saw on putting a double track on Washington, Adams, all the way out to 18th Avenue was really the amount of space that was available on Washington Street to put that double track, as well as the challenges that would present for mobility for all users, but especially for vehicular access and for that afternoon peak period. Go to the next slide. We then looked at concept A, and the difference here is we moved that couplet design out to 7th Avenue. This looks very similar to our 2012 LPA, but it's more or less a mirror. So instead of double track on Jefferson, we're keeping that double track on Washington. We still saw good ridership and good operations. However, the right-of-way issue and the mobility impacts really were not solved. The mobility issues just got pushed to west of 7th Avenue. Go to the next slide. And so we continued pushing that single-track couplet design out to 15th Avenue. This opened up a few more economic development opportunities by providing that single-track couplet. As was mentioned earlier in the public comment period, we are looking at single platforms on Washington and Jefferson. So you open up that access a little bit more to economic development opportunities as well as pedestrian access. But still, the challenges of the right-of-way needs along, especially the Washington-Adams curve and out along 18th Avenue, were still very challenging, as well as the mobility impacts. So if you go to the next slide. So we had concept C, and this concept just fully embraced the couplet design and basically converting it into a single track loop that would travel Washington Adams out to 18th Avenue and then back down Jefferson back into downtown Phoenix. A few important points on concept C. At the time, we were not 100% sure whether 18th or 19th Avenue would be desired, and so we left both options on the map. You'll also note, which was mentioned during the public comment period, that these maps do not include station platform locations. Rather, they show this kind of orange area, which is our station target areas. We expect this analysis to continue into preliminary engineering when we start looking at where those platforms would be located exactly. And then you also note that gray dashed line, which shows the various connections up to I-10 West, or what used to be called Phase 2. So if you go to the next slide. So next, I'll go through our public outreach strategy. And this lasted about 18 months, plus some stakeholder outreach after that 18 months. Followed a very similar or typical process that we look at. However, the challenges of COVID-19 came up right in the middle of our outreach strategy, and so we'll talk about some of that. But really focused on listening and speaking to the public and to the stakeholders in the area. This is a pretty short alignment, but it is has obviously a lot of strong stakeholders along it with the state and other government entities. We showed them the technical analysis and then gathered their feedback and reported it back to them. We'll go to the next slide. In addition to that, we had multiple technical workshops with City of Phoenix departments, over 40 stakeholder meetings, and the 2 public outreach meeting series. So we go to the next slide. The January 2020 public meeting series was 3 in-person events hosted along the Capitol Extension and I-10 West Extension corridors. I believe this was our last in-person public meetings before COVID-19 hit. We presented various alignment options, that technical analysis that I just went through. And then a few months later in the summer of 2020, we reported back to the public and gathered their input on the preferred alternative. I'll note on that summer public meeting series, it was obviously very different. It was our first public meeting series that was held during COVID-19. We provided both an online option, about 30 days, where any resident could log on and learn about the project and provide feedback. We also had multiple call-in sessions where the public could call in and talk to staff and get an understanding of the project and provide their feedback. And again, at this meeting, we presented the leading alignment alternative and asked specifically for their feedback on what they thought of that alternative. I'll go on to the next slide, please. During that May-June public meeting process, we had over 1,300 unique page views on our website. We had over 50 people call in and talk to staff and provide input. Go to the next slide. And overall, we received over 330 different pieces of input from the public, and you can see the breakdown here on how we received that input. Go to the next slide and the next slide again. And so in October of 2020, after our public meeting series, we provided a leading alternative that we are going to proceed with. You'll see here when asked about that concept C, if you go to the next slide and then come back real quick. So this was the recommended alternative that we provided to the public. If you could go back one slide. So we asked the public what they thought, specifically their support or not support of that alignment. And you'll see that 67% of respondents said that they supported concept C over the other concepts, with another 19% just being neutral on which concept they preferred. From a technical perspective, and what we presented to the public, we saw concept C as being the most constructible, providing the most benefit for Valley Metro and its riders. It provided good ridership, good economic development opportunity, and preserved the mobility for all users along Washington, Adams, and Jefferson. So you jump to that next slide. And so this was, we actually, in October of 2020, began the LPA approval process, both through City Council and through the Board of Directors. And this was the map we presented. And I think many of us will remember right before this was presented to Phoenix City Council, we heard some concerns from the state of Arizona, specifically regarding safety and security of the portion of the alignment on 18th Avenue. If you go to the next slide. So in response to that outreach and to that letter that we received, the project team huddled back together and reached out to the state. We met with DPS, the Department of Administration, the governor's office, and staff members from the Senate and the House multiple times to gather their feedback, gather their input on and their concerns about 18th Avenue. Since we have had 19th Avenue as an option all along, the focus primarily looked at what could we get done from a loop perspective, and 19th Avenue really came up to the top. There was general consensus from our stakeholders as well as the state that 19th Avenue is workable and feasible and that it would achieve the project goals. So if you go to the next slide. So in response to that outreach, to the public feedback that we've received and the technical analysis, this is the recommended alignment that we are bringing to the RMC today and to the Board of Directors and to City Council later today. This is a single track couplet on Washington Adams out to 19th Avenue, heading south and then east on Jefferson back into downtown Phoenix and the South Central downtown hub. Again, you'll note here there's 3 station target areas. One would be in the west side of downtown Phoenix, one would be along the state capitol area, and then one in between. And as was mentioned, because this is a single track couplet, we expect station platforms on Washington and Adams and Jefferson to provide that arrival and departure platforms. If you go to the next slide. So as we mentioned a couple times, we have a 2:30 appointment with City Council, if you will, to bring this recommendation to them. Assuming that the recommendation is approved through both the City Council and this body, we will advance preliminary engineering and the environmental process in the middle of 2022. The City of Phoenix and Valley Metro also have a TOD planning grant that we received for the Capitol and I-10 West extensions. And so we are coordinating closely with that team, with the city, to make sure that these projects work well together. And then we will continue community and stakeholder outreach. Next slide. And so the recommendation today, staff recommends the RMC forward to the Board of Directors approval of Concept C, 19th Avenue option as the amended LPA for the CapEx project, and authorize the CEO to enter into agreement with the City of Phoenix to fund project activities through the final design phase for an amount not to exceed $45.3 million. Thank you for the time today. I'm happy to answer any questions and hear any comments or feedback.
All right, any questions for the staff on this item?
Mr. Chair, this is Mario.
Go ahead, Mario.
No questions. Just a couple of comments. Just want to thank Scott and Henry and Josh for the presentation and all the work and coordination that you guys have done working with the City of Phoenix and all the stakeholders. As you can see, a lot has gone into this. There's been a great deal of vetting about this line. When we look back to that original LPA that was approved back in 2012, it'd be great to get this done at least in 2021, so that it's not a full 10 years since that was done, because that'll happen next year. But we'd like to at least be under 10 years before we get this new LPA approved. So we're excited about this, and we're grateful for everything that's moving forward. Right now, and the work on the downtown hub includes some work to attach to this capital extension. So we're already kind of been working on planning, design, and making sure that we're ready to go for this next level of the extension going out west. So not sure, Mr. Chair, if you're ready for a motion yet, but I'd be happy to make the motion.
Yes.
All right. Well, I would make a motion for approval of the staff recommendation on this item.
Thank you, Mario. Do we have a second?
I'll second from Eric.
Thank you, Eric and Tempe. All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Very good. Good luck this afternoon. Item number 4, future agenda items. Does any member have any future agenda items they'd like to bring forward? If not, as a reminder, the next meeting is Wednesday, January 5th at 2022 at 11 a.m. And that concludes our discussions for today. Right, Pat, are we done?
They're finished. Thank you so much for your
All right.
time.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thanks all.